Hello, everyone. So I'm back today. I wanted to discuss and analyze the strengths and weaknesses of both the Houston Rockets and the Golden State Warriors today before the game one of the Western Conference Finals today. So I'll start by analyzing Houston, and I always do my data analysis, kind of the rough data mining in a separate software, separate program, and then I do the more sophisticated kind of mathematical analysis in a separate program. So you're seeing kind of the end result because I also want to try to fit it in one tweet. But if you have any more questions, you can always ask me. So let's start with Houston. Houston's very interesting in that their entire, so this is a probability function right here, and the probability of them winning any game can always be broken down into how many 3-point shots they make versus how many 3-point shots their opponents make. And what you get here basically is a three-dimensional logistic function, which I've plotted here. So on the z-axis here is the probability of them winning a game, so 0 to 1. On the x-axis is the Golden State Warriors, how many 3-point shots they make. And Houston is how many 3-point shots they make here on the y-axis here. So as you can see, just by looking at the graph here, for Houston to win, they have to go along this line here where the gradient is positive, and as the more 3-point shots they make, but at the same time the less 3-point shots they make, their opponents make, which is Golden State in this case, the probability increases to 1 very rapidly. And you can kind of see this more sophisticatedly if you compute the gradient of this function. So let's do that. And by computing the gradient, you can see here, so in the coordinate chart, the first component is the gradient of P with respect to the amount of 3-point shots that Golden State makes. And the second component of the gradient is the amount of, it's with respect to the amount of 3-point shots that Houston makes. And you can see that the gradient is purely negative in the first component, as this is a purely positive function, so is the denominator of both. And the second component is purely positive as well. So that means that the probability rapidly decreases as Golden State hits more 3-point shots than Houston in this case. So then you can ask the question, okay, how much more? And you can simply say, well, that's a probability question. So you can say, well, if I wanted to know what does Houston need to do to have a 51% chance of winning any game, you can just solve the equation above. So it's very interesting. So for Houston to have just a 51% threshold probability of winning any game in this series, the amount of 3-point shots that they allow Golden State to hit has to lie on this line. So let's plot it out. So just for a 51% chance of winning any game this season, here is the amount of 3-point shots, or not this season, in this series, excuse me. So these are the amount of 3-point shots that Golden State hits or is allowed to hit, and these are the amount of 3-point shots that Houston hits. So just for a 51% chance of winning, you can see that for approximately 5 3-point shots that Golden State hits, Houston has to hit about 8. For 10 3-point shots that Golden State hits, Houston has to hit about a little bit more than that. So you can see it's about a 46.46 ratio, 0.48 ratio. So pretty close, but for every 3-point shot that Golden State hits, just for a 51% chance of winning, Houston has to kind of match that with 1 or 2 more. So that's how dependent Houston is on shooting the 3. But so that should be an interesting thing. But Houston is very single-minded in how they play. The reason why I give Golden State the advantage in this series is because actually Golden State can actually win by a lot more than just shooting the 3. So if you actually go through the Golden State Warriors strengths and weaknesses, according to the data, it's very interesting because although they have significant strengths, they actually have no significant weaknesses in their play that you can actually determine on a game-to-game basis that this is a weakness in how Golden State plays. So that's very interesting. They just have strengths, and in particular, the strengths are 3-point shooting, 2-point shooting, and defensive rebounding. So while Houston needs to hit a lot of threes compared to how many threes their opponents hit to win games, Golden State can beat you by the three, by the two, and also by a defensive rebounding. And we can in fact define a probability function for them as well. So I'll call that P2. And that's just 1 over, so and I've derived these numbers in a separate analysis, so that's where they're coming from, and I can show you guys if you're more interested at a later point. So that's Golden State's a probability function, and we can also compute the gradient of this. So you can see that it's very interesting that the gradient for all components for Golden State's probability function is positive in all of the components. That means that everything that Golden State does, from shooting threes to shooting twos and even defensive rebounding, gives them a significant advantage in terms of contributing to their win probability. So while Houston basically can only shoot threes to win, Golden State, even if they are blocked from shooting 3-point, let's say Houston defends them really well on the perimeter, Golden State will still be able to, I think, according to the data, they clearly have a significant advantage in 2-point shooting and defensive rebounding, as you can see from these two components here. But I believe that Golden State can also beat teams through defensive rebounding and 2-point shooting as well. So that's why I give Golden State the advantage in this series. Because I think a lot of people in the media are fooled by thinking that Golden State is just a 3-point shooting team. But as you can see here, their win probability is actually determined by a lot more than just shooting threes. And combine that from the data that they actually have no real significant weaknesses, I think that's why they are the favorites again to not only beat Houston, but win the championship as well. Okay, thank you for listening.